Well, this afternoon, be forewarned, this might be a long homily, so I apologize in advance. And it may be a little rambly. I have a lot of thoughts in my mind, and the thoughts centered around that this Sunday is the first Sunday in our diocese in the state of Wisconsin, and we're the first state in the country to ask people to come back to Mass. Unless for many reasons you don't have to come, but it's a contentious issue. And, I've been reading a lot of comments and things like that, and just wrestling with, well, what do you say? What do I think about all of this? Is the Archbishop right? Is he wrong? It's a tough decision, and maybe some of you wrestle with that yourselves. Maybe, I don't know, some of you is the first time you've come back in a while, and you're like, I don't know if that's the right thing that I'm here or not. Or maybe you know people who felt that way and aren't here. And it is a tough decision, so I'm not, by anything I say, want to dismiss the challenge of that thought process and that decision. But the Archbishop asked us, and I think this was a key part of his request, was to examine our conscience. To examine our conscience. So when there was a general dispensation, it was something like, you need no reason whatsoever to not come. You don't have to there's no thought has to go into it. I mean, hopefully there's thought, but you don't have to do that. It's just don't let that burden you. But the language has shifted. Now he says, there are a lot of good reasons not to come, but now he says, examine your conscience now as you make that choice. And I was thinking about, when you examine your conscience, you have to know what you're weighing. You have to know the sides, right? And so I think, and I could be wrong, but there are a lot of reasons that you know not to come to Mass. And I don't know if I need to articulate them, right? If you're over the age of 65, feel free to not come. If you're, unwell for some reason, if you have, whatever, you're caring for an elderly person, you work at a nursing home, in a hospital. There's a lot of reasons, and I think maybe we don't all know them, and feel free to call me, call the parish, although I'm on vacation next week, so don't call me, but Father Enrique loved to talk. But ask us, we'll share that if you're confused. But I think what is less known, or less articulated well, is why come? And that's what my homily is about today, why come? And I might not really look at our readings actually this much today, but I'll begin with wanting to tell a story. It's a story of my grandpa. My grandpa, well, he was born in 1908 in western Nebraska, in kind of the middle of nowhere. A joke, he was a dirt farmer. And when he was 34, he went off to Europe in 1944 to, in 36 is when he went off to Europe, but to fight in World War II. He was a doctor, he was a surgeon. And when I was in high school, I found a box of letters. And I asked my mom, what are these letters? She said, just don't rifle through my stuff. And I said, well, and then she went off to work, and I did what kids do. You rifle through your parents' stuff while they're away. So watch out, parents, while you hide your things. But I'm looking through her boxes, and I found it was all the letters that my grandma and my grandpa wrote to each other when my grandpa John was off in World War II. And I just have a little bit of a snippet from one here. It was June 12th, 1944. So 6 days before this letter, he was in England. And 4 days before this letter, he was landing on the shores of France. D-Day we call it, right? And so here he is writing June 12th. All is well, darling. How are you? I hope well and not worried about me. Tonight we really ate. Fried eggs and sausage, cookies, coffee, and dessert. Not bad. Today has been a very lovely day, and can see why they have called this sunny France. From here, reports are looking quite good. We listened to the BBC and American broadcast from London. I managed to clean up today and feel much better, change my clothes, etc. I hope the mail is coming through to you. Ours should be along any time now. We have plenty of coffee and cigarettes and quite a bit of candy left. I'm still unable to write much, but later will write when I can. I only wish to let you know that I'm perfectly okay, and for you not to worry. I love you very much and think of you constantly, and hope it won't be too long until we are together again. I shall close now. All my love to you and John Jr. This is my godfather, my uncle. Love, John. So June 12th, 1944, that month, or the next 2 months, I think over 2 million men landed on the shores of France. 20,000 soldiers were killed. 16 airmen lost their lives. And why? Why fight that way? Why go to war? Why risk your life when you have a son, a newborn at home, and all of those other thousands, hundreds of thousands of men and many women as well, risking their lives, many dying? Well, justice, freedom, this is a good cause, right? And we didn't know how good of a cause it was until afterwards. And in retrospect, you look at the Holocaust and some other things. And so we fight. We risk our lives, something worth fighting for. And my grandpa, as I said, was a surgeon, so he didn't talk, my mom said, much about it, but I imagine he saw, and especially in that month, but many months to come, a lot of horrifying things, right, as a surgeon in the middle of a war, the worst war, actually, that ever was. Okay, first story, my grandpa going off to fight. Now I'll tell another story. I'm going to tell two more stories, actually. Another story, this is from around the year 300, and I'm going to quote some things from a person named Saint Eusebius. And he was writing after a war in Europe, which caused a major famine and plague to strike through Europe. He says, in the Armenian War, the emperor was worn out as completely as his legions. The rest of the people in the cities under his rule were so horribly wasted by famine and pestilence that a single measure of wheat fetched 2,500 drachmas. Hundreds were dying in the cities, still more in the countries and villages, so that the rural registers, which once contained so many names, now suffered almost complete obliteration. For at one stroke, food shortage and epidemic disease destroyed nearly all the inhabitants. Some indeed thought fit to sell their precious possessions to those who were better off in return for a tiny quantity of food. Others parted with their treasures one at a time till they were driven by want to desperate straits, while some ruined their bodily health by chewing small fragments of cattle fodder and recklessly swallowing poisonous plants with fatal results. Some people, shrunken like ghosts and at death's door, tottered and slipped about in all directions. Unable to stand, they fell to the ground as they lay face down in the middle of the street, and they implored passer-bys to hand them a tiny scrap of bread, and with their life at its last grasp, they called out that they were hungry. Anything else than this anguished cry was beyond their strength. Others, men classed well-to-do, were astounded by the numbers of beggars, and after giving to scores, they adopted for the future a hard and merciless attitude, and the expectation that very soon they themselves would be no better off. So that in the middle of public squares and narrow streets, dead and naked bodies lay about unburied for days on end, furnishing a most distressing sight. Indeed, some even became food for dogs, and it was mainly for this reason that the survivors turned to getting rid of the dogs for fear that they might go mad and begin to devour. No less terrible was the pestilence, which consumed every household, particularly those that were so well off for food that famine could not wipe them out. Men of great wealth, rulers, governors, and numberless officials left by the famine to the epidemic disease, as if on purpose, met a sudden and very swift end. Such was the reward for the emperor's loud boasts and the city's resolutions against us, while the fruit of the Christians' limitless enthusiasm and devotion became evident to all the heathen. Alone in the midst of this terrible calamity, they proved visible deeds, their sympathy and humanity. All day long, some continued without rest to tend the dying and bury them. The number was immense. There was no one to see them. Others rounded up the huge number who had been reduced to scarecrows all over the city and distributed loaves to them all, so that their praises were sung on every side, and all men glorified God of the Christians and owned that they alone were pious and truly religious. Did not their actions speak themselves? A little while longer here in this is the most beautiful part. He was writing about what did the Christians do as everyone else literally fled for the hills. He said they showed love and loyalty in not sparing themselves while helping one another, tending to the sick with no thought of danger, gladly departing this life with them after becoming infected with their disease. Many who nursed others to health died themselves, thus transferring their own death. The best of our own brothers lost their lives in this way. Some priests, deacons, and laymen, a form of death based on strong faith and piety that seems in every way equal to martyrdom. They would also take up the bodies of the saints, close their eyes, shut their mouths, and carry them on their shoulders. They would embrace them, wash and dress them in burial clothes, and soon receive the same service themselves. But the heathen were the exact opposite. They pushed away those with the first sign of the disease and fled from the dearest. They even threw them half dead into the roads and treated unburied bodies like refuse in hope of avoiding the plague of death, which, for all their efforts, was difficult to escape. There was a Roman emperor, his name was Julian the Apostate. He was the last pagan emperor, and he saw the Christians who alone were caring for the sick, many to the expense of their own life. And he said, actually, that's why many people are leaving paganism, becoming Christian. This was before the age of missionaries or wealth in the church. People came to the church because of the generosity and the merciful love and the selfless love of Christians. That's my second story. My third story, I might call it our story. Reflecting on, the pandemic, right? That's hopefully not a shock to you that there's that going on. I was talking with the third graders and I was trying to be silly. They said something about a pandemic. I said, there's a pandemic? And they all looked at me. They're like, what? You don't know? I said, no, I know. I'm kidding. But they were very serious about it, which I suppose is a good thing. Well, our story, and that is, will history look back upon us? And I mean maybe you individually, but us also as a church, Holy Family as a church, but also the Archdiocese and me as a priest and the U.S. church just in general. And given the dangers that are real and shouldn't be taken lightly, which one of you has helped me understand that a little more. But given those dangers, will they look upon us, in 100 years, in 200 years, and they will say, in the year 2020, it seemed that everyone was at their throat, and people were ignoring each other, and people were shutting themselves up in their homes and not caring for the poor and not reaching out to those who had lost a loved one or who were in the throes of mental illness or disease or whatever it might be. Will they look upon us and say, but the Catholics, they did not run away, but they ran to those who were sick. They ran to those who were despairing. They ran to those who are alone. And I don't know right now if history is going to look back upon us and say that. And I say that to myself as much as any of you. And this is not a condemnation of a particular person, but I hope you sense what I sense, that very much we look at the world and we look at just Catholics in general and we look about the same. We really do. I think just as unsure and just as nervous, but also just as ready to only take care of ourselves and not all of those around us. I don't know what history will say. How can this be our story, though, in a positive way? Well, to think about, what is the church then? Or what are we calling people back to, given the risks, given everything that's going on? I met 4 people this last week who we are being called back to. I met a young woman who, she wasn't too young, I suppose, on the steps over at St. Robert's, begging for money. And the first thing someone came out of the church and said to me, they said, she's a beggar. Like, get away, don't talk to her. Later, like 20 minutes later, this other woman came up to me and, do you have money for the bus? And do you have money for food? And this whole story, and I don't know if it's true or false or what it is. We talked and we walked and we got her on the bus and, who knows where she'll go in life. I met a young man who attended every Mass last Sunday because he was in another church and he had come back to his childhood faith about the Eucharist and went to confession in February, and he said that he felt more reconciled with God than he had ever had in his entire life, and he didn't want to be alone in that. So he came to every Mass. I don't think anyone talked to him. I met another young man earlier this week, or yesterday, whose best friend got severely injured in a motorcycle accident and had to have a craniotomy to remove the swelling of his brain, and everyone was saying he's going to die, and he's still, who knows where he'll go. And he says, I don't know what to do, I don't know what to think, I don't know where I am, I don't know who I am. We need to be here because they're here. If the church is just a social club, and hopefully it is, hopefully we like each other and have fun, that's good. But if that's all it is, then we don't need to be here, frankly. You know, we have our neighbors, we have our family. That's probably enough time. If the church is just a place to come to feel good, we don't need to be here, because we can feel good a lot of places. You know, we can feel good online. We can feel good going for a walk, a beautiful weather, going down to the beach. If that's all the church is, and I think maybe the priest, and you can blame us for this, maybe we've articulated that. Maybe we've made Catholics, you know, just in general, think that the church is just a fun social place where we feel good. And if that's it, no wonder when we say, come back, they're like, you're risking our lives. Are you crazy? And maybe in our mind or their mind we are, because the whole message has just been, come have a fun, social, feel-good time. And that is crazy to risk your life for that. But if the church really is, as Pope Francis would say, I'll read a quote from him, a field hospital, more than it is a hotel for saints or a lounge for the complacent or whatever it might be. If it's a field hospital where healing takes place, then we need stretcher bearers, you know. We need people like my grandpa, you know, who are going to be willing to go and risk their lives and bring people here. Pope Francis says, I speak of the church as if it were a field hospital, and it's true. There are many, many wounded. So many people need their wounds healed. This is the mission of the church, to heal the wounds of the heart, to open doors, to free people, to say that God is good. God forgives all. God is the Father. God always waits for us. And so I suppose that leaves me with that question then, which, once again, this isn't just, you know, for you, it's also for me, because I very much also want just a fun, good time, just like anyone else, and it's a temptation to just leave it at that. But are we willing to be those stretcher bearers of the mercy of God out in the world? If that's the case, if we're willing to do that, then maybe all of a sudden next week or next month or whenever that might be, there are going to be people banging down the doors and say, let us in. And we're going to say, whoa, too many of you. We need to add more masses. We need to do something like that, right? We're not there yet. We do that examination of conscience. And so maybe I might give you a challenge. I always love to give challenges, and I'll end with this. If you know someone in your life who is suffering, if you know someone who's alone, if you know someone who's dying, if you know someone who lost someone, if you know anyone who is struggling, bring them with you here. Why not? That's my challenge for you. And if you don't know anyone that's struggling or suffering or dying or lonely or poor, then go and find someone and break out of the shell, because they're out there. You know, I mean, every year I wrote about a bunch of statistics, but something like 50,000 people die from alcohol, you know, another 50,000 die from drug overdoses, another 50,000 die from suicide. I mean, and that's just, you know, deaths of despair, let alone all the other struggles and sorrows in the world. The world needs us. Let's make our church, our faith, you know, this diocese, but at least you can control your own heart, if nothing else. Something that history will look back upon with the same, you know, fond remembrance as my grandpa. The same fond remembrance as the early church. Wouldn't that be beautiful if they would look back and they would say, you know, Holy Family, Whitefish Bay, or Milwaukee, or whatever category you want to put yourself in. When push came to shove, when people were at each other's throats, when people were fighting, when people were angry and bitter, the Catholics were not. And they sought out the lost. And they sought out those who were alone, who were poor, who were sick. And they didn't let them end up alone and in squalor. What a beautiful thing it would be to be known as that.